Hi, welcome to Tea Time in Olympia. I'm Luke Miller, and this is our holiday episode. Holidays can be a difficult time for some trans people, so today we're going to be talking with Rabbah Rona Matlow, who is the supervisor and support counselor at the Trans Lifeline, which, Rona, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, your background?
Well, thank you. I am an ordained rabbi. I'm a retired Navy officer, disabled veteran, a chaplain, a pastoral counselor, certified peer counselor. So I have a few different kinds of hats that I wear. I do volunteer work for a couple of different nonprofits, including the Soldiers Project, where we provide free counseling for post 9/11 active duty personnel and veterans dealing with combat PTSD. And as you mentioned, the Trans Lifeline, which is in concept a crisis hotline for transgender people, but we also talk to trans people who aren't in crisis but may be looking for resources, information, or maybe less than critical help that they need. And we also talk to allies and help them grapple with some of the issues that they may face. And we talk to providers sometimes and give them guidance on how to work with trans people as well. I'm a team leader for one of the teams of operators, and I monitor our Slack channel most of the time, and if an operator has a really challenging call, I may communicate with them over Slack or may even offer to them to dial me into the call, which is one of those nice things that technology gives us, and I can join in the call and help the operator out or provide additional information. And if an operator has a call that has been particularly triggering or difficult, that's where I really step in, is that I will debrief the operator either over Slack or another message channel or over the phone or even sometimes over a video chat like Skype to help them come to terms with what they experienced during that particularly rough call.
Okay. So wow, that sounds like a lot of responsibilities. Can you tell us maybe a little more about what's a typical day at Trans Lifeline like? What sorts of issues do people call in a lot with?
Okay, so we are 100% volunteer staffed, and everybody on the Lifeline is transgender. Now, when I use the term trans, I mean basically the definition of anybody whose presentation of gender differs from their assigned gender. And that's an overarching term. It can include a lot of different things. It's the simplest way to describe it. It's not just transsexual people who are medically transitioning, of course. We have different times of the day that are busy. Sometimes midday can get pretty busy, sometimes later in the evening. We have operators across the US and in Canada, so we cover about 5 different time zones. And we have numbers for the United States and Canada for people to call in for help. The busiest times are actually usually Thursday evening is one of the most crazy times that we get.
Really?
And sometimes on the weekends things get pretty busy. Of course, on weekends we tend to have more operators because people aren't at school or at work or whatever during those time periods. So weekday operators tend to be people who are retired or on disability or college students, people who aren't working professionally, or somebody who's on shift work maybe. If somebody works shift work, they might take a few hours of call in the morning. Right. Calls that we get, the most extreme, the level 5 calls, are when somebody is really desperate, they're thinking of hurting themselves, or sometimes even may have already started to hurt themselves. One of the things that's very difficult when we're dealing with level 5 calls is that we don't know who the callers are or where they are. And so as a rabbi and counselor, I have a legal obligation to report when somebody has indicated to me that they are at risk of hurting themselves or other.
Right.
However, with a crisis line where it's anonymized, we
Sure.
don't have that ability, and that's one of the things that allows people to talk to us more freely.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the tools that I've developed over time is to ask a caller in crisis if they will commit to me to stay safe this evening.
Mm-hmm.
I will never say, please promise me you won't hurt yourself, because that puts it in negative language.
Right.
It's a much easier contract to say they'll say safe for the evening.
Mm-hmm.
Tomorrow's another day.
Yeah.
And sometimes things look better the next day and they aren't so desperate. And research into suicidality has shown that if you can get a verbal contract with somebody in crisis, they generally will not harm themselves.
Mm-hmm.
In my time as an operator, I've only had one call personally where the caller would not make that obligation with me.
Right.
And I was really freaked out afterwards because I thought I had lost this person.
Mm-hmm.
And being a veteran myself, this person was a Vietnam veteran, and I was really worried that night that I had lost them.
Mm-hmm.
A few months later, they called and talked to me again. What a relief to hear their voice and know that they were okay.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we have to understand as crisis workers is we can't save everybody.
Sure.
And so, that's where the Slack channel comes in. People are taking calls, and if they get a really tough one, they can put out a call for help.
Mm-hmm.
And myself or one of the other supervisors will jump on and guide them through it. And so we kind of support each other. Less critical calls may be people looking for resources. A person is thinking about transitioning and they want to know where to go for hormones and counseling. So
Right.
we'll help them find resources. Or we often get calls from teenagers who are grappling with their gender and trying to figure out how to come out to their parents or their classmates at school or to somebody else in their life, and that can be a very challenging thing. We may also get calls from allies, family members. We may get a call from a parent who has a child who is trans and they just don't understand how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll talk to the parent and give them some information and help them find some resources to work towards coming to terms. We'll also get calls from providers. We'll get calls from counselors who have no experience with gender issues, looking for resources. And so I can point them in the direction of some information online or other reference materials that they can look at to learn about things. And sometimes they actually call and consult on a client if they have a particular question they don't know about. So those are the kinds of things that we face.
And those calls come from all over, right? I mean, what is Trans Lifeline's range? Are you national?
We cover United States and Canada.
Okay.
Okay. We don't have the ability currently to take international calls.
Right.
Although I guess there are technically ways that you can call 800 numbers from overseas using the internet. So we could potentially get callers from overseas somewhere. Now I have personally, on other media, such as Facebook Messenger, worked with people in Canada and Germany when they're in crisis. Wow. And one time, a three-way conversation with somebody in Canada and another person in Germany. So, the internet has a lot of interesting things, but one of the things is that it democratizes access to help. There are a lot of us out there who do help. And in fact, one of the resources I recently just learned about is called breakthrough.com, which is a telemedicine site devoted to providing counseling services to people wherever they are. So if someone lives in a community that doesn't have resources, they can go to Breakthrough and find a counselor. They may be in central Kansas somewhere and nobody's ever heard the word transgender, and they're talking to somebody in Los Angeles who is an expert or maybe is trans themselves.
So you get, at the very least, calls from all over the country. So it sounds like you have to have a pretty good working knowledge of what kind of resources are, not just online, but available in other localities.
Right. And Google is my friend.
Yeah.
We have specific search tools for different resources, but
Yeah.
when all else fails, I'll go to Google and, for instance, I'll Google PFLAG and a
Right.
community, and at least I can point somebody to the closest PFLAG. It may be 100 miles away, but at least there's somebody that they can talk to.
Wow. Yeah. So you provide a lot of different services at Lifeline.
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so tell us a little more about just your background. What led you to this kind of work? Tell us a little bit about your personal story.
Okay.
You know.
Well, as viewers can see, I'm wearing a lot of military decorations.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that. Yeah.
I was in the Navy for 22 years. I was an enlisted person. I was an officer involved. I was in nuclear power the entire career. I served on 2 submarines, 2 nuclear cruisers, a frigate, and a repair ship, and on several staffs.
That's a lot of time at sea.
It's a lot of time at sea.
Yeah.
I have 6 extended deployments, and I've got a few I've been there's, as you can see. Towards the end of my career, I was working on a master's degree in engineering management and being programmed to go into the Beltway with the Defense Acquisition Project. And while I was working on that master's degree, I had this aha moment
Yeah.
that being a defense acquisition specialist was not for me, and that I really wanted to reconnect with my Jewish roots and pursue the rabbinate. So after I retired from the Navy, we moved to Philadelphia, and I started studying at Gratz College just outside of Philly, and I earned 2 master's degrees there, Jewish education and Jewish studies.
Okay.
Spent a couple of summers in Israel studying, and decided that I was finally ready and applied to a couple of different seminaries to which I was accepted, and went to the Academy for Jewish Religion in New York. And I was ordained in 2009. Along the way, I did about 800 hours of training in clinical pastoral education, which is hospital chaplaincy training.
Right.
And I also had the problem that neck injuries that I had in the Navy caught up with me and ended up in excruciating pain. So in 2006, I ended up having some neck surgery and ended up on permanent disability at that point. So I haven't worked professionally since I was ordained.
Okay.
We moved to Olympia in the summer of 2009, and I got engaged with the Jewish community here and started spreading out, recognizing that I wasn't going to be working professionally as a rabbi. I started looking for other avenues and found out about the Soldiers Project. As I said, meant we provide free counseling to veterans and active duty personnel who served in combat in the post 9/11 era.
Right.
And I've been offering counseling services to them for about 4 years now. And in fact, recently on their annual report, they highlighted 5 volunteer counselors. I was one of those. And what was interesting is I'm the only non-licensed counselor. The state of Washington allows me to practice as a behavioral counselor by virtue of being ordained. So I don't have to have the same license that a licensed practitioner would have, but it allows me similar privileges. Along the way, dealing with my own health issues, I started questioning things, and early in 2015, started experiencing some significant hormone imbalances, and after seeing several doctors and trying to figure out what was going on, we finally figured out that what was going on, I was receiving testosterone supplementation because I was on high doses of narcotics, which stopped the production of hormones. And my doctor kept asking me, well, you're getting all this testosterone, are you feeling better now? And I kept saying, no, I'm not. And after starting to do some research and reading a lot about transgender issues, I finally figured out, oh, maybe this is what it is. So I had a conversation with my sister-in-law's wife, and she is also a mental health provider in the queer community, and she helped me figure out some things. And in the summer of 15, I actually started attending the transgender discussion group that's held on Wednesday evenings here in Olympia. And that was when I finally figured out, yes, this is the right place. This is what I've been looking for. And so I started transitioning at that point. I started taking hormones October of last year, so about a year now I've been on hormones, on estrogen and testosterone blockers, and officially came out to the world on my birthday last year. So almost a year officially being Rona now.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
Yeah,
It's been a wonderful ride.
good. What sort of reception have you received as a veteran, as a rabbi? You know, what sort of impact has your transition had on those, aspects of your life and on your counseling work?
So I've been very fortunate because I'm disabled, which sounds crazy, that being disabled is a good thing, but I'm not in the workplace. Most people who transition in the workplace have severe difficulties. Employers, coworkers, customers are very brutal at times to people who are transitioning. Even people who have, for the most part, stabilized out in their transition to their chosen gender or their correct gender. And so it's very challenging. I don't have those problems. And so I've found that in the Jewish community, I've received wide acceptance as a transgender rabbi. As far as I know, there's around 20 of us worldwide, although the number is always increasing. My seminary this year started one gender fluid student and one female to male student. And so these are their first transgender students, although I'm the first transgender alumna. So, even in the Orthodox circles, I've been accepted. Even the Orthodox rabbis may not agree with what I'm doing, but the ones I've worked with have still been open to my visiting, and so it's been okay. The congregation that I attend was very supportive. The only question that they asked me was, "Will you still be able to do everything that you do for us?" Great question. The answer is, of course I can. So from that standpoint, it's been good. My experience as a veteran is interesting. I know at least a half a dozen different transgender veterans in Olympia. And currently nationally, there's around 134,000 transgender veterans, according to National Center for Transgender Equality and Transgender American Veterans Association. And there's currently about 15,000 or so transgender personnel active duty in the military. And of course, the military, as of the 1st of October, is now accepting openly serving transgender personnel under certain conditions. And I know a lot of people who are now wearing their correct uniforms and are just very happy to be in their positions. There are some, unfortunately, who haven't had as smooth a transition because if they have a colonel who doesn't understand or who is transphobic, it could be very hard on somebody. So it's not all a bed of roses for everybody. As far as dealing with the VA, to me, it's been pretty easy. Even when I was starting to transition, before I was officially out, I was dressed as Rona and going to the VA, and I've never once been misgendered at the VA by a staff person or another veteran. So I've been pretty lucky as far as all that goes. The one hurdle that I had at the VA is that the VA's hormone dosing guidelines were kind of ultra conservative. They're too worried about thromboembolus, which is a blood clot, and so they tend to underdose on hormones a little bit. Because of that and the fact that I have other healthcare insurance, I made the decision to switch to a different provider. But the provider I was seeing at the VA took what I said to heart and said that she would actually talk to providers in town to learn more about transgender hormone issues. And, so that, for instance, the Polyclinic has a provider who's been doing this for over 20 years and has never had a blood clot in a patient. So, for someone like me, taking 4 milligrams a day of estradiol is perfectly safe. Whereas the VA had me on 1.
I have heard from a lot of transgender veterans who are seeking transition services through the VA that not only is it a bit of a bureaucratic nightmare, but there doesn't seem to be that high a level of education about the actual medicine involved, for hormone replacement therapy or surgery or even just therapy and counseling. And have you found that to be
Well,
have you found there to be any improvement there? Do you think that maybe the VA is starting to educate itself a little more?
it's very location-based, and we're very fortunate being here in the Puget Sound region. At the American Lake Clinic in Tacoma, there is a transgender veteran support group, and there are therapists and psychiatrists who do know about gender issues, my own psychiatrist included. And in fact, she was able to sense that I was grappling with dysphoria before I told her about it. So
Good.
she's
Yeah.
very tuned.
Yeah.
In addition, the VA hospital in Seattle will do orchiectomies for trans women veterans who are, for various reasons, choosing to seek that surgery as opposed to waiting for gender-confirming surgery.
Right.
So there are a lot of options here.
Yeah.
In Cleveland, the VA recently opened up a dedicated transgender care clinic, but there are other VA clinics where it's less rosy.
Yeah.
There is a program called Veterans Choice, which is a health insurance program for people who live roughly 40 miles or more from a major VA facility. And some people are finding success using Choice and seeking private practitioners. Other people aren't, because Choice, like many government insurance programs, doesn't pay enough, and most providers won't take it.
Right.
And then there's, of course, the old red tape issue. So,
yes.
It's a mixed bag, but there's progress towards. And that's really all you can ask for. You really can't expect a major organization like the VA to change overnight, or like the Department of Defense to change overnight. Anything like this is a process. It takes time. And as you have more people who are advocates and activists, and more people pushing the limits a little bit, things do change. So I mentioned the Transgender American Veterans Association. And there's also Sparta Veterans, which is another umbrella organization for LGBT military and veteran personnel. And along with NCTE, the National Center for Trans Equality, Lambda Legal, and some of these other organizations are working very hard to bring equity into the military workplace, into the veterans care, and into the broader civilian workplace. And as with anything else, it takes time.
Yeah. Well, I know more locally, our president of PFLAG Olympia is herself a veteran, served at the Joint Base over here, and has been running a support group for active duty veterans and military families who are GLBTQ over here in Lakewood.
Right.
So there are resources both locally and on the national level.
And as it happens, Dana McCormick, the head of the local PFLAG chapter, is an ally.
Yes.
She has a gay son.
Yes.
And that's where she and her husband came to be strong supporters of the LGBTQ community.
Yes.
I mentioned that I know at least a half dozen veterans in Olympia who are trans. I also know at least a half dozen soldiers and airmen at JBLM who are trans.
Yeah.
And they're all openly serving as transgender service members now.
Good. There was a time when that just really wasn't possible, was it?
Last year it wasn't possible.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the people at JBLM, Captain Jennifer Peace, has been very vocal and has been in the media and has had a lot of difficulties from her command structure in living as a trans woman.
Yeah.
Fortunately for her, the Department of the Army has been institutionally more open than some of the other branches, and so she has been able to continue to grow into her identity as Jennifer.
Good.
And she was looking at the possibility that she may be passed over for major the last time I talked to her. Right now, things have probably changed because the rules are different now.
Yeah, well, let's hope so.
Yeah.
So good. Things are improving for trans people in the military and retired from the military.
Absolutely.
So now I'd like to change gears just a little bit. The holidays are coming up. This is traditionally kind of a funny time for GLBTQ people who may not be close to their families or who may have experienced rejection from their families or who may not be yet out to their families about their gender identity, their sexual orientation, their transition status, whatever that might be. What do you find to be the case? Do you get a lot of people calling about that this time of year?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
In general, every crisis line's business picks up around the holidays. Thanksgiving and Christmas are the busiest times of year for every crisis line. Recent research has shown that crisis lines like 1-800 273-TALK are woefully unprepared to deal with GLBTQ people, and particularly with transgender people.
Yeah.
And more often than not, if somebody who's trans calls a conventional crisis line, they may end up worse off than if they hadn't talked to anybody at all.
Wow.
And that's why Trans Lifeline is so vital.
Yeah.
Okay, so people can help Trans Lifeline in several different ways. One is if they are trans in any way identified, they can volunteer to be an operator on the Lifeline. There are no education or certification requirements to be an operator on the Lifeline other than being trans. Okay, and however you identify that.
Right.
And the other way, of course, is financial donations, either through our website or our Facebook page, our Twitter page at Trans Lifeline. People can donate through any of those ways. Cash donations help us to continue to keep the lights on, so to speak.
Right.
There's a lot of technology that goes behind running a lifeline like this with operators all over 2 countries.
So there are a lot of volunteer opportunities with Trans Lifeline.
Absolutely.
Even if you are not necessarily trained in, counseling or don't have any credentials as far as being a mental health practitioner, there are still plenty of things that you can do to help out here.
Absolutely. So, one of the things I learned very early on in my chaplaincy training was that giving somebody an ear, letting them know that they're heard, is much more than half the battle. You don't have to be a brilliant counselor or a brilliant chaplain to save somebody. All you have to do is give them some attention, give them some love, give them the respect that they deserve, and listen to their issues and help them figure them out. And they will do much better. So anybody can be a crisis line operator. We do put people through a number of hours of training.
Right.
And then after they've been through the training, they do what we call ride-alongs, where they'll listen in on calls taken by one of the leads. And so they'll get a general idea of how to handle things. And then they're put in the wild. They start taking calls. And that's where the Slack channel and the supervisors like myself come in. We're prepared to step in and help the new callers out, whether it's a question about finding a resource or whether it's a major crisis and somebody is about to hang themselves, which I just dealt with the other day.
Wow.
So, it can be pretty varied. Now, when we get into the holiday situation, it's much more difficult.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the issue of families, which are always a very volatile thing around the holidays.
Sure.
Everybody has an Uncle Jerry or an Aunt Peggy who is very boisterous and vocal about their opinions. And even in general circumstances, that can be very stressful.
Yeah. I hear that attendance at AA meetings certainly goes up a lot around this time of year.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Any group or service that's dedicated to helping people cope gets very busy from now until after New Year's. So things get crazy. The other time of year when things get really hectic on the Lifeline is when certain political situations occur.
Sure.
So for instance, over the summer, North Carolina passed HB2. There were all kinds of protests in North Carolina, and a lot of businesses pulled out and canceled events. But our call volume from North Carolina doubled in the days and weeks following the proclamation of HB2. Because so many transgender people were so stressed out about the hatred. And we actually, as hard as it is to believe, we actually fought that battle here in Olympia last year.
Yes, we did.
So I just read this morning that the Human Rights Campaign designated Olympia as the only capital city in the country to earn a score of 100 on their LGBTQ index for being able to be welcoming for the queer community.
Yeah.
And
We didn't do so good the first time around because someone forgot to send in the form, as I understand it.
I don't
so
know about
it was,
that, but
it was kind of a, I think it was kind of a point of honor for the city to do much better the second time around. So some real effort went into that, I think.
right, but
Yeah,
last
but-
fall,
yeah.
during the legislative session, which was supposed to be dedicated to education issues, there
Yeah.
were no less than 6 different bills
I know.
in the House and Senate in
Yep.
Olympia dealing with transgender bathroom access.
Yes.
And I was invited by the Jewish Community Federation to be a witness testifying at one of the Senate hearings on
Yeah.
one of these bills.
Yeah.
Fortunately,
Yeah.
we beat all of the bills and I-1515, and
Yep.
so transgender people in Washington can access the bathroom that matches best with their gender.
That battle isn't over yet, but it's looking good for our side, I'd say.
Right.
But so, what sorts of specific issues do people cite when they call around the holidays? What sorts of difficulties do they find they're dealing with if they are in touch with their families? You know, is it like mostly coming out issues, or how to fit into a family's, you know, gender structure around the holidays? What do you find to be some of the common themes that come up when
Well,
people call?
Yeah, you know, the question of how to come out to your family is an internal question. Although obviously if somebody only goes home at the holidays, then that's the time when they may need to come out to their parents, you know, or to their siblings, or to their aunts and uncles and cousins. Some people will talk to their families over the phone. Some will send them written letters before they show up. There are different ways. Of course, these days with the internet, you know, people kind of know anyway. You know, my nieces and nephews knew before their parents told them because they saw my Facebook posts.
Right.
You know, so it really was a non-event when I came out.
Yeah.
But coming out is a huge issue, and that's true for all LGBTQ people, that a lot of parents are used to having their son Johnny, and they can't accept the idea that they now have a daughter named Jane. Or, you know, they were looking forward to Susie getting married and having children, and now Susie is telling the family that she's going to be Sam, or that, you know, this is my wife, you know, a woman showing up with her wife, you know, all these different possibilities.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even get into the issues of people who are gender fluid and people who are other than straight or gay. When you deal with the bisexual, the pansexual, the possibilities are infinite. You know, as varied as there are people, there are possibilities in the queer community.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. Coming out is one of the most challenging things. But even if you're out, the battle isn't over yet.
Yeah.
Because you may have homophobic or transphobic relatives.
Right.
And you may have a relative who still calls you by your dead name. The dead name being the name that you were before you transitioned.
Yeah.
You may have a brother who refers, as in my case, my brother calls me his brother. He won't acknowledge that I'm a woman.
Yeah.
You know, we all have these kinds of battles that we continue to grapple with.
Yeah.
You know, I know there are some families that are very open and supportive and loving and accept their children. You know, my mother, over the summer when she was in the hospital, told me that she doesn't necessarily understand or like my being transgender, but she's my mother, and she would never turn her back on me, and couldn't possibly understand how any mother could turn their back on their child.
Yeah.
Yet, sadly, we have far too many parents and siblings and broader family members who do, in fact, turn their backs on people or misgender them or snub them or you know, verbally abuse them, sometimes even physically abuse them for being who they are.
Do you get a lot of calls from people who are cut off from their families for that reason, and you know, maybe dealing with the loneliness and isolation that results from that? And how do you respond?
Well, one of the common guidelines that's put out to anybody who is trans when they start to transition is that you have to be prepared to divorce yourself from everybody in your life. You have to be prepared to divorce yourself from your birth family, from your broader family, from your original friends, many of whom may turn their back on you, from your career. You may be a very skilled professional and have to turn away from it. So, for instance, one of the famous ones was Lynn Conway in the 70s. She came out to IBM as a trans woman. She had developed some extremely advanced microprocessor technology, and IBM fired her. If IBM had kept her, Intel would not have gotten off the ground. And the computer world would be very different today. Instead, she went to University of Michigan and was a professor of electronics engineering instead. So that's a reality, that you have to be prepared if you're going to transition, that there's the possibility you're going to have to divorce yourself from everybody in your life. So, it's very traumatic. And if you are away from home, whether it's because your job is taking you somewhere, or you're in the military, or you're in college and you're away from home for the first time, and on top of that, you're exploring your gender and sexuality, you could feel very lonely around the holidays, especially if you don't have money to get home, or if your parents don't have money to send you home. So that can also be a very challenging issue. So these are a lot of the different kinds of things that we confront on the Trans Lifeline. And of course, again, anybody who is dealing with other than binary cisgender identity is urged, if they're having issues like this, to call us at the Trans Lifeline. Don't go to standard crisis lines, because you may not get the help that you need.
So what other advice do you have for people, for trans people, how to prepare, for whatever eventualities they may face if they are going to have contact with their families, or even if they aren't? What are some of the guidelines that you could suggest that people do to kind of, mentally build their fortitude for that?
So the most important and the first thing is to acknowledge your own feelings. Everybody has different feelings and emotions about these situations, and you can't hide from them. If you hide from them, it's like a festering wound and it eats away at you. So you have to be open about your feelings, whether that's talking to a friend or a therapist or a clergy person or a civilian counselor, or calling us on a lifeline, whatever it is. You have to learn how to process those feelings. You can't ignore them. You have to own them. You have to know why they're happening, what they're going to do, and you have to be prepared for that. So the next thing is to have a plan. You know in advance, before you go home, that you do have the Uncle Jerry and the Aunt Peggy, and you do have the dad who insists that you're the daughter, who's always going to wear a pink tutu, or whatever it may be. I'm using extreme cases, but you have to understand that you're going to face these kinds of issues and challenges, and think out in advance. Well, gee, if Uncle Jerry calls me Susie when I'm identifying as Steve, Uncle Jerry, my name is Steve now, and let it go at that. Be prepared for that kind of thing. Don't engage in a battle. Be ready to have emotions flare up, and know what you're going to do if those emotions do flare up. Do you need to go outside and take a walk? Do you need to go up to your room and rest for a few minutes? Do you need to go get a drink of water? Do you need to talk to a friend back home? Whatever it is, have a plan for what you're going to do in such a situation. The most extreme case, of course, is to be prepared to bail out if you have to. If things get too harsh, be ready to get in your car and drive away. If you don't have a car, well, I certainly hope that you have Uber.
Have the number of a cab company.
A cab company or Uber or Lyft, and or know where the nearest bus stop is, whatever it is, but have a plan in place so that if you have to bail out, you can. So reach out. know who you can contact, know who your friends and allies are, know who the resources like the Trans Lifeline, and have those all in your speed dial so that if something does occur, you can go talk, go find a private area and talk to them. Be realistic. You have to expect that Aunt Peggy is a drunk and that she's always going to say mean things. And you have to kind of develop a thick skin about that. And don't let it get under your skin. Just let it wash off like water off a duck's back.
Right.
Okay? Set aside differences. Okay? You know that Uncle Jerry is going to be a pain. So, okay, yeah. Well, you know, Uncle Jerry, we both like the Ravens, so let's sit down and watch the football game and just put away this other stuff for the time being. I'm not a Ravens fan, mind you. It's just the first name that came to my mind. If you're doing holiday shopping or travel planning, stick to a budget. Financial situations can be a huge stressor, and that can really get things out of control very quickly.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to learn to say no. Your mother may beg you to come home for the holiday, but you know that you have your prejudiced father there, or you know that your brother's going to beat up on you, and you just don't want to be a punching bag.
Or if they know you're transitioning, they may insist that you come home as your assigned gender.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you have to show up as Steve when you're married now, you know, or you know, when your name is 3.2, if that's how you choose to go, whatever it is.
Yeah.
You have to. Sometimes you're just going to have to say no, and that goes back to what I said earlier, that when you transition, you sometimes have to be prepared to divorce yourself from everything in your world.
Right.
Okay? Don't abandon your healthy habits. Remember to breathe.
Yeah.
Remember to find ways to stay safe and stay centered. If you meditate or do yoga or take walks, these are all important kinds of things that you have to really hold on to.
Right.
At the same time, don't self-medicate. Getting drunk or getting high may feel great in the moment, but it won't solve anything, and it may, in fact, actually make things worse.
Right.
Okay? Giving back. So, say you are stuck at college away from home, and you miss your family and your friends at the holidays, and you're sitting in your dorm room with nothing to do. Well, so maybe you volunteer at a soup kitchen, or maybe you volunteer for the Lifeline, and you spend some hours doing some very fulfilling things. That can be a very meaningful way to spend the holidays, and that can be a gift to yourself, and it can be a gift to those around you. And last but not least, accept yourself. Because if you don't accept yourself, no one else will.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, this is why queer people traditionally have developed chosen families for themselves when their birth families, you know, simply can't find it in themselves to be accepting. You know, you can't see them for the holidays, so you cook a big dinner and you invite your friends over. You know, and that's I think has been, you know, a major mainstay of queer culture, you know, for a very long time, is that ability to create new families, you know, out of friends and loved ones and kindred spirits.
Yeah, in fact, we did that last year for Thanksgiving. With the exception of one guest and my wife, everybody there was a queer veteran.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
So a lot of our viewing audiences are friends, family, and allies of transgender people. Can you offer a few words of advice on maybe etiquette for if you have a transgender person coming home for the holidays? How do you make that person feel welcome and accepted and respected? What are some of the main things to do and not to do?
Sure. So you have to, again, have a plan. Know that you are going to have this family member or this friend coming. And the first thing is ask, what would you like to be called? You know, if you knew them as Steve, but they identify as Mary now, or that you don't know what their name is now, just ask. That's fine.
Yeah.
I don't think there's any trans person who will be offended if you ask them their name. Likewise, asking what pronouns that they use. If you're used to referring to somebody as he, but they use she now, or z, however you pronounce it, Z-H-E, or they use she, or some of the other different variations that are showing up these days, just ask. It's not offensive to ask what pronouns a person uses. And I'm being very precise in the language, saying what pronouns we use, not rather than what are your preferred pronouns, because I don't think it's a question of preference. I think it's a question of just what fits you.
Yeah.
And it's part of your personality.
Right.
Okay? The biggest questions to not ask are about medical issues surrounding transition. Hey, so did you get your boobs cut off yet? Or hey, have you had bottom surgery yet? Never ask those questions, ever. If I, as a transgender person, mention that I had a particular procedure done, well, then you can ask about it.
Right.
But that would be true if I had told you that I had a knee operated on as well.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay? But never, ever ask somebody, are you taking hormones? Have you had the surgery yet? Any of those kinds of questions. It's very personal. They may not be ready to talk about it to themselves, let alone to other people yet. So don't touch that.
Okay.
And the last thing, I guess, would be if you see somebody in your environment who is being abusive to somebody who's queer, whether it's trans or otherwise in the LGBTQ world, take them aside. Don't do it publicly because that humiliates them and it humiliates the queer person, but maybe take them aside for a minute. Hey, Uncle Jerry, that's Mary now. Please don't call her Steve. Do it privately so that you don't humiliate Uncle Jerry either.
Right. Okay. Well, do you have any closing comments for us? Any thoughts you would like to leave our audience with about the holidays or Trans Lifeline or anything else we've talked about?
So the biggest thing is, as we talked about having the plan, and this plan will be available visually, but know who you need to call if you're in crisis, and don't hesitate to reach out to somebody. Have that safety net because you may very well need it.
Yeah.
There are enough people that we lose every year to suicide and homicide. We don't want to see more statistics.
Exactly.
Please be safe, be responsible, and have a wonderful holiday season.
Yes. And that information about Trans Lifeline will appear at the bottom of your screen. And I'd like to thank Rabbah Rona Matlow for being with us today and talking about the holidays and the work that Trans Lifeline is doing. Thank you very much for
It's my honor to be here today.
for being there for so many people. And that's our holiday issue of Tea Time in Olympia. So I'd like to wish everybody a safe and happy holiday. And remember, look after yourselves. And if you need someone to talk to, Trans Lifeline is always available. Thanks very much.
Cheers.